In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Dear audience, I have been talking about grammatical functions. In my last video, I talked about subjecthood of the sentence. In this video, I will be talking about objecthood of the sentence. So, I will be talking about direct and indirect objects, and later on we will move forward to talking about complements and modifiers. Direct and indirect objects. A direct object is canonically an NP undergoing the process denoted by the verb. His girlfriend bought this computer. So this computer here is the direct object of the verb. That silly fool broke the teapot. So broke the teapot. Teapot is the NP, which is the direct object of the verb broke. However, this is not a solid generalization. The objects in 15a and 15b are not really affected by the action. In 15a, the dog is experiencing something, and 15b, the thunder is somehow causing some feeling in the dog. Let's read 15a and 15b from Peter Sells. Thunder frightens the dog. The dog fears thunder. Once again, the data show us that we cannot identify the object based on semantic roles. A much more firm criterion is the syntactic construction of passivization. Of course, sometimes the NPs which are coming after the verb, they cannot tell us whether something is object or not. So we need to devise a test, and this test is called the test of passivization. It can help us understand that whether something is the object of the sentence or not. This sentence can be turned into passive sentences in 17. His girlfriend bought this computer for him. The child broke the teapot by accident. So here we can say the computer was bought for him by his girlfriend. So here the computer is taken from the place of the object and put at the place of the subject, and we can say this computer was bought. So it means that this NP, which is this computer, it is the object of the sentence. And here it is coming at the place of the subject. The teapot was broken by the child by accident. What we notice here is that the objects in 16 are promoted to subject position in the passive voice. That test comes from the fact that non-object NPs cannot be promoted to the subject. Dear audience, the very first thing that we have understood here is that if something is the object of the sentence, and if that thing can be placed at the subject position in the sentence, it means that it is the object. Otherwise, it is not the object. Secondly, the test of passivization tells us that there are so many NPs in English sentences. For example, complements are also NPs, but complements, they cannot become part of the subject in the passive voice. So it means that something which can come at the place of the subject in the sentence, that is basically the object of the sentence. That was basically the object of the sentence. He remained a good friend to me. Now here he remained. So remained is a verb which does not require an object after that. NP is coming, but it is not the object. This item belongs to the student. Belong is a verb which does not require object after that. So we cannot say the student is belong to. Wrong. A good friend is remain to me. Wrong. So these are basically the copular verbs or linking verbs or such type of verbs. They do not require object after that. The objects that undergo passivization are direct objects, distinct from indirect objects. So we need to differentiate between indirect and direct objects. I threw the puppy the ball. So here the puppy, it is the indirect object and the ball is the direct object. Because usually indirect object comes before the direct object. But we can interchange their positions and we can say I threw the ball to the puppy. So once I make it, I threw the ball to the puppy. To the puppy will become oblique object. And oblique objects cannot be turned into the passive voice sentences. This you should remember. John gave the boys the CDs. The boys is indirect object and the CDs is a direct object. And both can be changed into the passive voice. The boys were given the CDs. The CDs were given by John to the boys. But once you make it, an oblique object, if I say John gave the CDs to the boys, so to the boys is a phrase which is starting with preposition to the boys and it has become an oblique object, then passive voice cannot be made. So here the boys is the recipient, the puppy is the goal, my mother baked me a birthday cake, me is the benefactive role, my mother baked me a birthday cake, me is indirect object and a birthday cake is a direct object. So we can say a birthday cake was baked by my mother for me. Or I can say I was baked a cake by my mother. Remember here oblique object is not there. Only direct and indirect objects are there. So both of them can be changed into the passive voice. The boys were given the CDs. She was sent a review copy of the book by the publisher. Note that sentences with indirect object and direct object order are different from those where the semantic role of the indirect object is expressed as an oblique PP or oblique object following the DO direct object. So when you change the position of the indirect object and you bring the direct object first and you take the indirect object later on, so in fact then you introduce that indirect object with the help of a prepositional phrase. That is why it is said oblique prepositions or oblique objects. John gave the CDs to the boys. So to the boys here is an oblique object or indirect object. The publisher sent a review copy of the book to her. So to her is an oblique object. My mother baked a cake for me. For me is an oblique object. Now basically they are indirect objects, but when they come before the direct object, they are working as indirect objects. When they go after the direct object, they work as oblique objects. And oblique objects cannot be made into the passive voice sentences. They cannot be passive voiced. In this kind of example, it is once again the direct object which can be passive voiced. So direct object in this case can be passive voiced, but indirect object which has become oblique object in the active voice sentence cannot be changed into the passive voice. The CDs were given to the boys by John. A review copy of the book was sent to her by the publisher. So of course, when the indirect object and direct object, they are used in the sentence like that. First indirect and then direct. He gave his wife flowers. So his wife is indirect object and flowers direct object. Remember, both of the indirect and direct objects can be turned into the passive voice. But if you take the indirect object after the direct object and you say he gave flowers to his wife. So to his wife is an oblique object. So oblique object cannot be passive voiced. In this short video, I have talked about direct and indirect objects. Remember, we need to understand between action verbs and stative verbs. Action verbs, they require object after that, and ditransitive verbs require two objects after that. But if something has to be an object and not a complement, we use passivization test. And in passivization, we bring the object to the place of the subject in the passive voice in the beginning of the sentence. So of course, if that sentence can be changed like that, it means that that was the object. And this is the only test which can help us to determine that something is the object of the sentence. Thank you very much.